Today's message, I struggle with what to entitle today's message, but God is faithful was what I had about 4 different titles, I think, probably, but I chose God is faithful. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 4 through 9, we read in our call to worship Paul's great encouragement to the Corinthians. Now, they had a lot of issues. They were very much like the modern church. They had a lot of division. They had a lot of struggles. They had a lot of the world trying to creep in, and frankly was in. And Paul's letters to them were exhortations to unity, to drive out false teachers, and to deal with all the problems they had. And that's mostly what the letters are about, and that's why they're so applicable to us. If it was all just encouragement, you kind of wonder where the correction would be. I was in a meeting this past week with some of the leadership of the company that I work with, and things are going well in the projects I'm dealing with at the moment. And the CFO of the company says, "Well, Jason, I don't really know." He said, "Everything's green. I don't know what the purpose of me being here is if there's nothing for me to make decisions on or give advice about." And I said, "Well, I guess I apologize for it being in good status. I don't." But his point is a good one, and that is that sometimes we need to highlight the areas that are wrong. Hence, David says, "Show me my sin." I encourage you to pray such a prayer because sometimes we don't see so good ourselves. If I take off my glasses and look in the mirror, I don't see as clearly as when I have my glasses on. So I want to keep them on while I can. And if I don't, I have to get really close to see clearly. So I want you to think about that God's truth, it should be a mixture of both encouragement and correction. And don't be upset that there's both, okay? Because we need both. We need encouragement. We shouldn't always be negative and giving criticism. But at the same time, if it was always positive all the time, it would eventually kind of get like, yeah, I heard that. I know I'm great. That would be the impression. If you ever hear is positive reinforcement that you're doing great, then that's what you lead to. And we needed positive reinforcement because sometimes we're really down on ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I look around, if I look outside these 4 walls, and you don't have to go very far to find something to be down about. And that's always been true. I reckon it will always be true till Jesus comes and takes us to the forever, wonderful, eternal heaven where those aren't a problem. But that is not the case today. And so we need encouragement, we need strengthening, and sometimes we need strong correction. And David was a person just like you and I, King David. And as such, he was apt to make mistakes. And sometimes even he would make apt to make mistakes where he had good intentions. Those are the most frustrating situations to me, to see somebody has good intentions, but they're doing the wrong thing. The Apostle Paul was such a person as that. He had good intentions, that he wanted to uphold what he thought was right, what was righteous under the law, and yet he was persecuting the very church that God had established to demonstrate the perfection of that spirit of that law and to love righteousness more than simply checking a box that you had been right. And so it's important for us to remember that we all need correction, and David is corrected in today's message in a way that I don't think he's expecting, and no one else around him is really paying attention that happens. But David was tempted. We often see David's temptation with Bathsheba being his greatest temptation, and that probably is true, and he fails. But he's tempted today too. It seems very clear if you read between the lines of today's message in 1 Samuel, you'll see, I think, that what I saw, which is that David was tempted, and he thinks he's doing the right thing. If we go back 1 chapter, last week we spoke about King Saul, not Paul, but King Saul, and the witch of Endor. And I told you I was going to skip over the first 2 verses and come back to those 2 verses of that chapter. So that's what we're doing. And then we're going to jump over the rest of the chapter and go to 29 because it's all in one context. So it's important to realize all this is happening at the same time. So it says, it came to pass in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for warfare to fight with Israel. And Achish, who was a Philistine, said unto David, who was living in the Philistine lands, Know thou assuredly that thou shalt go out with me to battle, thou and thy men. Now listen carefully what comes next. And David said to Achish, Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. And Achish said to David, Therefore I will make thee keeper of mine head forever. Now, if you remember in the few chapters ago when David is he's still working to escape the King Saul's clutches, he goes to Gath, he goes to Achish, and he's given Gath as a city for he and his people to live in, while God deals with Saul in whatever fashion God has decided to deal with Saul in David's life. And so he's living there. He has inhabited this place. We don't know exactly how long he's there, but some period of time, long enough for him to go kill off some of Israel's other enemies in other places and come back. And Achish the whole time thinks, oh, I got him now. He's mine now. I mean, he's out fighting for me now. No, he was never fighting. He was never fighting for Achish. He was fighting for the interests of God and the old enemies of Israel. So here we see a bit of a problem for David, though, don't we? Because it says in verse 1 that the Philistines are gathering their forces to war to fight who? Israel. And Achish turns to David, or sends messengers to bring David to him, and says, you should understand that you're going to battle with me, you and your men. And who are they going to fight? Israelites. That's a problem. That should be a problem. This is the man who's been anointed to be the future king of Israel. And yet he's going to fight his own people. Not even fight his own people in a civil war fashion, but fight them on behalf of other foreigners. This should be a problem. But David's reply is a bit cagey. He says to Achish, Surely thou shalt know what thy servant can do. So does he mean what I'm capable of? Or does he mean what I'm allowed to do? David has, every time he speaks to Achish, he always hedges. He always holds back a little bit. Because when he went and fought all the Amorites and all the other folks he fought a couple of weeks ago, as we read, he says, King Achish asked him where you've made a road, is the term that he uses. Where have you been lately? And he says, oh, I've been fighting to the south of Judah and fighting to the south of these other places. And he's like, oh, you've been fighting Israel. Awesome. That's what I'm glad. That's all right. Now I know you're really loyal to me now. He didn't realize he was fighting to the south of those places against enemies of Israel. And David never filled in the blanks. He's like, well, if that's what he wants to believe, that's great. So here it seems that David maybe is giving that sort of answer again. You know what I can do. Yeah, I do know what you can do. You killed my champion. You killed Goliath. All right. You're capable of some pretty awesome feats. Or David is saying, you know how far I can go. But it seems that Achish again hears what he wants to hear, because he says, all right, I'm going to make you the keeper of my head. I'm going to make you my protector forever. That's strange. People often hear what they want to hear, especially people who are opposed to you. They're either going to hear the best or the worst, but they're never going to really want to hear the truth. That's a problem. That's a problem. If you hear facts with a bias, they're going to sound like what your bias sounds like. Michelle's cousin, she down in Statesboro, her mother and father came down with coronavirus, and they're recovering, thank the Lord. And she had to be tested because she's been closely associated with them. She came back negative, but she had told her mother-in-law, she says, I just want the results to be clear and accurate. I want them to be clear and accurate, because then I know what to do. I just don't want to be biased one way or the other. If it's bad news, it's bad news. If it's good news, it's good news. Just make sure I understand which is which. Sometimes our path in life seems to diverge and it goes very quickly foggy, much as the image that's demonstrated here. We've got a path that splits. We have a road that splits. One goes uphill a little bit, the other goes downhill a little bit, but you can't tell where either of them go very far. And I don't know about you, I am forced to live a day at a time. I don't know about you. Have any of you living weeks or months at a time? Bob's like, yeah, man. When you get my age, you're living years at a time. The reality is, right, we have to take life as it comes. We can't take tomorrow. We have only today to live. And Jesus says, sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. The difficulties, the challenges, the problems of today are enough. So deal with today's issues. Deal with what's right in front of you, is what I'm trying to say. And don't try to plan too far ahead. Now, I'm not against planning. I've made a living planning, so I'm not opposed to planning, but I also know that plans need to be adaptable because God's will is not always crystal clear to us in the future. Sometimes it's foggy. Sometimes it's a bit mysterious. We don't know what's on the other side. And sometimes that's for our good, and sometimes that's just the way it is. But David, I would imagine at this point, is thinking, now what? Now what am I going to have to do? This man's been far more loyal to me than my own king. So should I serve him because he's taken me and my people in? Or should I fight against the Philistines and betray them when we get there? What's the right thing to do? I can imagine he probably had lots of thoughts and didn't quite know what to do. David was a man of bold action, and this seemed like a strange situation. So go with me to chapter 29. Before we go there, I want to take you, this is where they're fighting. This is where they're fighting. The Valley of Jezreel. Arguably one of the prettiest places in all of Israel. Really spectacularly beautiful picture of this place. I didn't take this picture, but isn't it? I wish you could see the colors on my side. They're not near as rich here. It's an amazing looking place. You've been there. This is probably a view from someplace like Mount Carmel. So when Elijah was threatening the prophets of Baal, they looked down, all of them, and they could see this beautiful valley. Beautiful place. Many battles have been fought in this valley, such that Napoleon apparently stood there at one point and said, it's the perfect place to make a war. Something along those lines. That's at least what I've heard. Many people have fought there. Alexander fought there. David is going to fight there many times. Saul's fought there. Babylonians fought there. Persians fought there. Romans fought there. It's like an avenue right down through the middle of Galilee. So you can't miss it. You got mountains on either side. And it's very fertile, so you can feed your troops as you abscond with the locals' food the whole way. So that's where they're fighting. Is now the Philistines gathered all their armies to Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain, which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands, but David and his men passed on in the rearward with Achish. So they stayed with Achish. Remember, he'll make you keeper of my head forever. Stayed with Achish. He's not in the vanguard. He's not out front. He's in the back where Achish is. Then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews here? And Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years? And I have found no fault in him since he fell unto me unto this day. David was loyal. David was a person you could trust, is all he's saying. David, we can count on this guy. I know he's a Hebrew. I know his clothes don't look right. He doesn't smell right. He don't look right. And he doesn't act right. And his language, his accent's all wrong. But I'm telling you, he's a guy. You can count on him. He's a good guy. You're like, yeah, that's all well and good, but we're going to go fight his people. The princes of the Philistines were wroth with him, with Achish, And the princes of the Philistines said unto him, Make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place, which thou hast appointed him. And let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should it not be with the heads of these men? I can just imagine the gesture they're making to all the Philistines around them when they're saying that. Is not this David, whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands, and David his 10,000s? That was apparently a very popular tune. I mean, really. It was catchy, apparently. You could dance to it, yes. It must have had a good beat. Sure, all the discos were open with that there. Probably not. So then Achish called David. You can imagine. Poor Achish. I say poor, huh? This is about the last time you ever hear of him in this chapter, by the way. He kind of disappears. And Achish called David and said unto him, Surely, as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me in the host is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee since the day of thy coming unto me unto this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favor thee not. They don't like you, David. I got nothing against you. You've done nothing to make me upset. I'm really happy with you. But I have to say, generally speaking, that they're pretty mad. And so you can't stay. So it says, And Achish answered and said unto David, I know that thou art good in thy sight, etc. Wherefore, now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as ye be up early in the morning and have light, depart. So David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning to return into the land of the Philistines. And the Philistines went up to Jezreel. Isn't that an interesting turn of events? Who do you think is behind this? You think the Philistines were just colluding? I think that's just happenstance, just a coincidence of events that the Philistines could not be convinced to let David fight for them? Or do you think there was some providential work at hand? Yeah, I think it's the latter. God was sparing David. David was willing to be loyal, even though I am sure his loyalties are conflicted in this moment. But how could he bite the hand that fed him, right? But at the same time, he's an Israelite. He's anointed to be their king. To me, this is the first temptation of David, to fight the wrong fight for the right reasons, right? Being loyal is a good thing. I mean, you can't fault someone for being loyal. The concept of loyalty is a good thing. It's a wonderful thing. But what happens to loyalty if you're fighting or struggling for the wrong side? What about all those German troops that were fighting for the Nazi regime? And what about all these Chinese troops today that are fighting for a communist, godless regime? They're loyal. Can you be mad about their loyalty? You can't be mad about their loyalty. What you can be upset about is their doctrine, their teaching, their understanding you could be upset about. But the concept of loyalty should not upset us. We should emulate someone's loyalty. I see someone who is of the Muslim faith stop in the middle of the mall or some shopping center, put down their prayer rug, and begin to pray. I could be upset because, wow, that's not appropriate here. Or I could say, that's pretty amazing loyalty to their faith. Right out here in the middle of everything, they're willing to be persecuted, to be castigated, to be mocked, and that they go about it anyway. That's a good testimony. That is a good sample of loyalty. Even if it's loyalty to the wrong thing. But David is given a way of escape. This is one of the many examples in God's word where one of God's people is trying to do the right thing, or is in a path that they did not expect to be in, and they are given a way to get out of the trouble they are in. You can look at Daniel. Daniel is faithful, and because of his faithfulness, he gets in trouble, and he's thrown into the lion's den, and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're thrown into the fiery furnace, all of them trying to be loyal to God's commandments to them. And God delivers. God doesn't always deliver in the same way, but he does deliver. And so he's told, David is, and his men to rise up early in the morning, and as soon as it's light, leave. As soon as you can, get out of here. Go home. Go back to Gath. You're going to find out why it was important for them to go back to Gath very soon, but not today. You're welcome to read ahead. This is an open book test, but we're not going to talk about it today. What I want to speak to you today, really briefly, is that God always provides a way of escape. Always. In 1 Corinthians, going back to the same book from which we started, Paul speaking to the Corinthians, again, I said the Corinthians are similar to today's church. They're full of all kinds of challenges. He writes in chapter 10, verse 13, "There hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation or test also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it." There is always an exit strategy. God always has a way out. Sometimes we don't want to leave. David could have refused and tried to argue with the other Philistine princes that no, I'm here to fight. Just trust me. Use me as whatever you want. Put a double guard on me. Whatever you want, I'll fight for you. But he didn't make such an argument. He took the way of escape. He saw his opportunity to get out of this fight, and he took it. What do we learn from last week's lesson that Saul is about to encounter? Destruction, absolute destruction. This is going to be a bad fight, really bad. And David was not going to play any part in it on either side. Sometimes you just have to not have a dog in the fight, as it were. But there is no temptation taken who? You. Now, who is this written to? The church at Corinth. Very important point I want you to understand. This is not written to the public. This is not an open letter to all people whoever might happen to read it. This is to the saints, to the people of God, to the children of God, those called and born again by the power of God's Spirit. This is not an open letter to any such person, to every person that happens to read it. No temptation has taken you, the people, the church of Corinth, the people, the church at Northside, but such as is common to man. You know, sometimes we want to go, yeah, but you can't relate to my problems. I know you want to sympathize. I know you want to tell me God's word has answers, but I don't know. My problems aren't the same. That is not right. It's not right. Scriptures are very clear. It not only says there's nothing new under the sun, it demonstrates again and again and again and again and again that really there are no temptations, no problems, no issues, no struggles that we have had that have not ultimately been common to mankind from the beginning, from the very, very beginning. He says, but God is faithful. Remember what he said in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, God is faithful. It's important for us to remember God is faithful. We might be all messed up. We might have stumbled in our faith. We may be struggling. We may be in a really dark path at the moment. We may not know which way to go. We may be like David. Well, should I be loyal to this guy or loyal to my country or loyal to my church or loyal to my family? I don't know which to do. What do I choose today? several years ago, I was working full time. I was going to school many hours a week. And of course I was married, and Orion was born during that time period as well. And I had a home, and I was new to home ownership. There's a lot of stuff on my plate at that point in time. And somebody asked me, Jason, how do you do all that? And I say, I don't. I do not. They're like, what do you mean? You got all these priorities, all these responsibilities. I said, well, that's fine, but I can't do them all. And I came to that conclusion. I choose two every day. I get up. I choose two. What's going to get my attention today? Because I don't have room for all three: family, work, and school. I had to choose two, and something suffered. And that's just a reality. Something's got to give. You can't do it all. Can't do it all. You have to prioritize. And so Jesus says, what are we to prioritize first? God. And then, very quickly, everybody else. They're your neighbors. And then guess what? You're last. You're last, as it were, in that list. Doesn't mean that you're not seen to. Don't get upset. But for you, your priority should be God, your neighbors, and then yourself. Obviously, I'm not going to tell you not to eat if you need to eat. You got to prepare and do what you got to do to take care of you to do the things that God has called you to do. But remember that God is faithful. And because God is faithful, he will not suffer you to be tempted above that you're able. You'll not have a test. You'll not have a temptation. You'll not have a struggle in life that you are not able to meet. And he will also make a way of escape that you'll be able to bear it. So you get out, right? There'll never be a woman in my department so pretty that I could not get away from her. There'll never be a challenge in God's word that I will not have a way to meet it. Does that mean I always will? No, unfortunately, I wish that were the case. Remember what David said? You know what I can do. Some things we just can't. We do have limits. But our limits should not be based on what God is able to do for us. God is faithful. He's always and forever enabling us to do the best and giving us a way of escape. You see these signs? If they're working right, if the fire alarm went off, my understanding is the lights in those would come on and the exit word would illuminate. Is that the way it's supposed to work? That's the way they almost always work. And there's probably be some sort of horrible sound going off whenever it's doing it too. It wouldn't surprise me. Thankfully, we never had a fire here to find out. But why are these kinds of signs required by law? We have to have the fire marshal come in occasionally and check the system and so forth. Why? Because people need to know how to get out. If there is a destructive fire in here, people need to know where the exits are. So if we tore down the signs and got rid of the lights, people might go, does that go outside or does that go to the bathroom? Where does that door go? I don't know. Why does that matter? Because unfortunately, many times, either we ourselves do it to us ourselves, or we do it to others where we remove the exit signs, or we confuse the exit signs. Unfortunately, we put up some of these sort of temporary signs to trying to maintain distance or whatever. And so we've got enter only and exit only, and all trying to manage a little bit of trying to manage the traffic around here. Not that there's that much, but still trying to be cautious. And some people are like, okay, well, I can enter, I can exit. Well, I can't, if I go out that door, am I going to have to go all the way around the building to get back in? And it's not that strict, okay? But there is some confusion. That's why these are paper signs. I'm not going to indelibly paint this on the wall. This situation will pass. This is not a permanent landmark, per se. What does the Old Testament tell us about the landmarks? Don't remove the landmarks. They mark the boundaries of where you're supposed to go, right? People get really upset when you move the boundary. Daryl was just telling us, I think it was that Wednesday night you were telling us about your neighbor that kept coming over on your land? Kept coming over, and no, this is my property. No, I promise you, this is not your property. Land boundaries are established by a legal agreement. And they're not kept in my safe or your safe, they're kept in a county office because it is should be a publicly known thing. Landmarks. They drive those metal pins into the ground as landmarks. Literal landmarks. So spiritually speaking, we have landmarks, and guess where your landmarks ought to begin and end? In the Bible. God's word should describe to you and me what the ethical landmarks, what the escape plan is, and how to know the path that leads the shortest distance to the escape plan. You know, when you're on a plane and you're flying, and they immediately, before you ever take off, I fall asleep just about before I could get through this message because I've heard it so many times, but they always seem to tell you that the lights on the floor will illuminate in the case of an emergency to guide your path to the exit, which may be, the closest one may be in front of you or behind you. Be sure you look around to see where the closest emergency exit is. They're usually over the plains and other places. Well, what if they didn't mark those things? What if they said, you know what? We hope there's no accidents. We hope to get you to Houston on time. Enjoy. And then they crashed. And everybody burned up because they couldn't figure out how to get out of the plane. I'm almost absolute. I've done zero research into this, so somebody go out there and figure this out for me. Do they have to have that spiel that they say now all the time? Do they have to give such clear, crystal clear, even boring directions because people got burned up in a plane? It wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me. People need clear directions. And I'm afraid sometimes they just get tired of hearing it. It's the same old stuff, right? Be loyal to your husband or your wife. Take care of your children. There's no, sin is bad. And it's like the world's gotten just numb and doesn't care about, like, whatever, I'm going to sleep. They're apathetic. They don't care. Yeah, we've heard that message a million times, whatever. This has never happened to me, right? Or the classic one is, yeah, I know this is happening in my life. I've got a problem with, I don't know, drugs or alcohol, or I'm seeing this woman on the side, or whatever it is. I could stop it any time. We have this illusion in our heads that we can just quit. Never mind that we get all entangled with our sins. We get entangled with the things that we're addicted to. We get entangled with the things that occupy our mind. But there's an escape plan. There is always an escape plan. And we, the church, should be the ones that always make sure that the batteries in the escape sign, the exit sign, work. We should make sure people know the way out. We should make sure that we know the way out and that we are willing to go the way out if it's clear. We should not argue to stay. We should be like David. Okay, you say I can leave. Okay, bye. I'll be gone in the morning. See you when you get back. We should be willing to leave, even if we are tempted to stay. Be willing to take the escape path, because otherwise you will not be able to bear it. There are temptations that get too strong. That's another thing, that some temptations start weak and they grow, right? Years ago, many of us went to a marital kind of like conference. It was really good. And the speaker, he pointed out how important it was to realize when you're beginning to be tempted. He says, if you're a married man and you find yourself going to the water fountain or to the water to go get water, and there's this young woman that comes and you strike up conversation with her, And then you realize that she gets thirsty at about 9:35 every morning. And you go, you know what? It's about 9:34. I think I'm going to stretch my legs and stop by the water fountain. Bob's laughing because he knows that's how human nature really is. We do stuff like that. We definitely do things like that. That is feeding your temptation, right? And before you know it, goes from going to the water fountain to, I wonder if I should involve her in this project I'm working on. We might have to go to lunch. We may have to work long hours. And before you know it, that means business trips. And before you know it, that means a disaster. And I'm picking one example. There's many, 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 many examples that we can. Look for the way of escape. Know where the exit signs are. Be willing to leave. God is faithful. God will always provide. Don't neglect to hear his chastening. Don't forget to hear. It will start often as encouragement. Yes, keep up the good fight. You can get through this. Whenever you come, he'll be there to pick you up. When Paul was drowning in Galilee during the storm, and after he had just walked on the water, he had done the most amazing thing anybody other than Jesus had ever done, in my opinion. That walking on water is amazing. Peter did, yeah. What did I say, Paul? Yeah, Peter. Peter walked across the water, and then he looked around, and he saw the waves and the wind. He took his eyes off of Jesus and began to sink. He cried out to Christ. Who was there immediately? Christ saved him, both literally and figuratively and metaphorically and spiritually, in every which way that a man could be saved. Peter was saved by Christ. Cry out to Christ in your temptations, in your battles, when the water is getting too deep and it looks like you're going to drown. Cry out to Christ. He will be there in an instant because he's already there. Even if he asked you to go out onto the water or gave you an encouragement to go out into the waters, if you begin to sink, realize that he is there. And he will not say, just paddle harder. Why don't you have more faith? What's wrong with you? No. Grab you by the hand and pull you right up out of the water. I always wonder how that scene played out. We only get that they got back in the boat. Did Jesus bring him back up onto the water and just kind of plop him back up onto the water like you do a child, put him back on their feet? It was still water. What was Jesus holding on to pull him up out of the water? Nothing. Same thing that God hung the earth on. Nothing. It's amazing. It's wonderful. It's absolutely a miracle. There's so many little miracles that are going on in that whole scenario that you don't even stop. It's not like he's not a lifeguard that swam out to Peter. No, he just walked over to them and said, you're having a problem. Let me grab you up, brother, and put you back and took him over. We don't know if he carried him to the boat or just kind of struggled with him we don't know. But we know that Jesus saved him. And I don't see any indication that Jesus stopped walking on the water. Jesus, in his miraculous effort and power, will be there to save you and me. We pointed this out, the rock of escape, a few weeks ago. Jesus is the ultimate rock of escape. Just be looking for him. Keep your eyes open. Keep your eyes peeled and take the path when it appears. Take the path when it appears. I pray the Lord will bless you this week to know his presence, that whatever battles come your way, whatever loyalties you think you have or don't have, that ultimately you realize that it is God that is faithful to you, not you faithful to God. And it's definitely in that order. God is faithful, and then by God's grace, we have faithfulness in him. But we're dependent upon his faithfulness most of all. And he will never tempt us above our ability. And even when we are tempted, he will give us a way to escape. He'll never force us to go through it. He'll never force it. If it gets too deep, he will be there to save us and to pull us out. So don't be afraid to pull the cord, right? Get out before your life is made a shipwreck.